Hi, everybody. Let's talk about Walt Disney. Walt Disney is an American original and one of those great business success stories from the 20th century. But there are a lot of things about him that people don't know. Some really interesting twists and turns in his history that I think could give us a more complete picture of how persistence and hard work really pays off in the business of creativity. So, Walt Disney, well known for being a success, having built an amazing company and an amazing library of animated films, and of course, theme parks and other entertainment properties. So much so that nowadays we think of a lot of Hollywood and entertainment being owned by Disney, based on the current trajectory of the way things are going, the way studios have begun to gobble things up and consolidate. But it all started with Walt Disney and his vision for what he wanted to accomplish in his life. So it's interesting to go back and look at where he started. So Walt Disney, as a young man in his late teens, early 20s, found a great interest in art and cartooning. And after he returned home from World War I, he decided to set up shop and set up his own little studio in Kansas City, Missouri. And he set up a business and started working on making comics and cartoons for advertising and for other businesses in the area. And he did fairly well and grew up pretty quickly. He didn't do the work himself. He actually hired a staple of artists to help him out. And here actually is a little picture of a side trip I took once and got to see the original studio that he founded in Kansas City. Still there in a sketchy part of town, but you can find it and see the shell of the building that's left over from his time there, where he all got his start. So from the beginning, Walt Disney was a little bit of a showman, standing out front and basically advertising himself and his company, branding himself. You could think of him as an early brand in and of himself. But what he did was possible because of the artists he hired. And there are a few different artists that started with him here in Kansas City and went on to accomplish many other things. One of the ways that they made money was to make little intro movies or little intro clips that would go at the front of movies. He had these Laugh-O-Gram cartoon shorts that would go out. He also had some contracts to do some school-related videos, not videos, but films, animations, and other things. And unfortunately, he got a really large contract, and his investor and the person that hired him didn't come through. And within a few months, in his 3-year-old company, he was out of business. He was bankrupt. And this is something that actually would happen to Disney a few times in his life. And I think that's one of the important parts of his story, is to recognize that it was not a perfect, road paved in gold success story for Disney. He had to overcome many challenges and many business failures. And I think you'll find as you study successful business people, they usually have a defeat or a failure of some kind that really has a significant impact on them. And losing his first studio was one of those things. In fact, he shot one of his last films, sold the camera he had, and got just enough money to take a train ride to Hollywood, where he was going to meet up with his brother Roy. And this is when the story really starts to take off, because you have these two brothers, Walt and Roy, working together in Hollywood, trying to establish a new studio and a new idea. And this wasn't easy to do. They didn't have any money, but they pooled the resources they had and decided to start over. And it's interesting to see how at each one of these situations, Disney was able to convince his friends and family to take a risk and to join him in the effort. And that's what he did. He brought, in particular, one artist that had worked for him in Kansas City out to help establish his studio. Here you see a picture of a larger group of individuals that joined his team after a little more success. But the person over here on the side, Ub Iwerks, was the artist that he brought with him to Hollywood to help him establish the studio. And one of the projects they worked on was a new character to create little animated shorts, again, to go at the beginning of different films. And they had a contract with Universal Pictures, and they produced all Oswald the Rabbit cartoon shorts to go at the beginning of the movies. And they really took off, and they were very popular. And they had an order, don't quite remember how many, but they were in business, and they had to do a lot of these in a short period of time. So Disney, with this new success, started to hire more workers, started to develop more techniques and technology for his animations. He was ready to make a deal and really, take his studio to the next level. So he took a business trip to New York to visit with Charles Mintz, who was running Universal Pictures at that time. And the idea was that they were going to renegotiate their contract, and they would set up an order for new films and be able to take Oswald the Rabbit to the next level. What Disney didn't know is that Mintz was also aware of the success of Oswald the Rabbit and decided that he wanted to cut Walt out of the deal. And secretly, behind his back, he went behind his back and got his animators and most of his staff, Disney staff in Hollywood, to jump ship and to move over to Universal Pictures and start their animation studio. And so when Disney arrived to make this new deal and to solidify their friendship, Mintz stabbed him in the back and took Oswald the Rabbit and most of his animation staff away from him. And this was a huge failure. This meant no more contract, no more business. And Walt was just distraught, didn't know what to do. But as the story goes, Walt found a silver lining. He rode the train to New York, and he ended up riding the train back from New York all the way back to LA. And as the legend has it, it was on that depressing trip home that Disney decided that he was going to create a new character to replace Oswald. Decided that he didn't need Oswald anymore, and he was going to say goodbye to those animators that had left him and come up with a new character and new storyline to sell to other studios. And that was Mickey Mouse. Ironically, turns out that Charles Mintz turned up in Up as a villain, Charles Muntz, and it was said that Pixar used him as an example for that character. But one of the last remaining animators on Disney's staff was Ub Iwerks, probably the most talented of the bunch. And he was able to stick around, and they together, Disney and Ub Iwerks, created the first few Mickey Mouse cartoons. And thankfully, at least for Walt, they were a big hit. And they really reestablished the power of Disney animation. And I think that's another interesting principle to understand about Disney, is that he was able to take a business failure, which probably could have ruined him, and turn it into something else. He knew that he had enough confidence in himself and in Ub Iwerks that if they'd been successful with Oswald the Rabbit, they could do it again with Mickey Mouse. And looking back in history, nowadays, nobody talks about Oswald the Rabbit. That went on to be ultimately a failure for Universal Pictures. But Mickey Mouse, on the other hand, became the most popular and recognized character in history, pretty much. And here's a little picture of Iwerks working on Mickey Mouse. Now, there's another important part to this story that kind of goes along with Disney's ability to succeed in spite of his challenges. And that has to do with the fact that he always embraced technology. And that was kind of a driving force with anything that he would work on. In the beginning, animation was the way to take cartoons and make them move. And that was really fascinating to him and why he started his Laugh-O-Gram studio. Well, other technological advancements in the art form were really attractive to him as well. And he knew that if he could pair up his art in his storytelling with new technology, um, he could be on the cutting edge and be, the first in line and get somewhere with an audience. And Steamboat Willie is the next significant thing to happen. Is they were able to pair sound with film for the first time, and they made a synchronized cartoon where you really heard Mickey Mouse's voice for the very first time. And that was just, jumped way ahead of his competition and made his cartoons stand out that much more. But again, at each stage, he had to risk a lot to make it happen. So they had to spend all their money, pool all their resources, and put everything on the line to actually get the money to put up the technology they needed to make Steamboat Willie, but it paid off. After a few years in the 20s and early 30s of putting together a really solid animation studio based on the success of Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney wasn't satisfied, and he decided the next thing he needed to do was to try to make another advancement, both in color and in feature-length animation. He wanted to take it to the next level, and that's where we get Snow White, where Snow White comes into the story. And here again, both Walt and Roy mortgaged their houses, everything they owned. They reinvested all the money that was made on Mickey Mouse and put it into Snow White. If Snow White had been a failure, Walt Disney would have lost it all. But here again, he bet on himself and he bet on his business, and Snow White was a huge success, and they were able to take that money and really set the studio on a solid footing for many years. That led to him being able to purchase land and build a new studio in Burbank and really get himself set up. And that's what led to films like Pinocchio and Bambi and Fantasia and this whole series of new groundbreaking films that he was working on. And again, he was set to be a success. But something happened. A little thing called World War II came along and frustrated the plans for Disney's new studio. So what happened is that a lot of the distribution and a lot of the success of his films not only were because of their distribution in the United States, but in Europe and around the world. And because of World War II, because of the tragedy and the disruption, they weren't able to buy Hollywood films anymore, and his movies didn't have an audience. And so financially, his next few feature films were a failure. Also, as part of the war effort, the Army moved into his studios in Los Angeles and decided to set up shop and create a defensible position there with offices and other things to watch over Los Angeles. And so Walt Disney realized that his animation business was changing necessarily for the war effort. And instead of making feature films, they had to pause and they started making military films, military training films. And so he had to adapt and find a way to keep his studio alive and keep his animators employed. Because actually many of his animators were drafted as well. And so they had to modify their business and adjust to the new normal. That's when we get to the next part of the story where Disney took another risk. So after the war, when things settled down and calmed down and business and other things started to return to normal, the story goes that Disney had an idea for an amusement park. Not like the amusement parks of the past, but an amusement park of the future, which would have a better layout, better attractions, be a better family experience. One part of this that I don't want to forget to mention is that at every stage, at every situation where he needed to make a change and to adapt and to expand his business, he really had to rely on his brother Roy. We know Walt Disney as the face of the company, the creative driving force, but it's his brother Roy that really financed the process. It was Roy that had the relationships with the banks and the financiers and was able to put together the deals that helped pay for many of Walt's dreams. And it's impossible to think of Disney being a success without the two brothers working together. So what did they do to be able to finance Disneyland and get it off the ground? He started making TV deals. And again, pairing technology with creativity, Disney was one of the first to get in on the ground floor of TV and see what it could do, both to advertise his films and his amusement park, but also to promote his content and his storytelling. And so it was because of that partnership with studios like ABC and others that he was able to raise the financing necessary to build Disneyland. And it was finally then, after all that time, that television and advertising actually finally brought the company into probably finally brought the company into success. Up until that point, they'd always had to risk so much to get a new film out or to build the amusement park. But after these last deals for Disneyland, they finally had a business formula that worked and made the company successful. Then, as true to form, Disney decided to expand and move his amusement park business to Florida and expand what was possible there, which unfortunately Disney didn't survive to see. He died in the early 60s as a result of lung cancer and wasn't able to see his company fully formed and successful. But again, it's important to understand what it takes to be a success in business. And I think a few of those things that we can learn from Disney and his brother are, number one, to have an idea, to stick with that idea, to overcome adversity. Even when you think you're losing, use that loss and that failure to train you and to teach you how to move to your next business idea. Have confidence in yourself and embrace technology. That's another really important thing that I think Disney was able to do. And if you use this as an analogy for yourself, think about, where will you go? What is the new technology that you can embrace to take your art form to the next level? And do you have a support staff? Do you have a friend? Do you have a brother? Do you have a sister? Do you have family members that can help you build your business? Because these things are a team effort. No one person can do it by themselves. And so I think it's definitely important to recognize and remember that it was these two brothers coming together, helping each other, that actually made their business successful. All right, so that's why I think Walt is someone important to follow, not just because I enjoy what he created so much, but because he overcame adversity and he never gave up on himself. I think that's an important lesson to learn. All right, thanks for listening, you guys. See you next time.